There is a moment when the sun disappears, when darkness falls, and you're left with just your fears. That's the moment you feel your first pang of doubt. That's the moment when the night comes out.
Episode 6, The Hidden Library, Part 2. Everyone around us has a secret. Even the most honest individuals have things they would rather keep in the dark. But what if those thoughts, actions, and feelings were suddenly illuminated? What if you found that the person you trusted most was keeping something very important hidden from you? How would you react when the trust has gone, when the truth becomes clear, and when the night comes out? Vaughn drove back with his fingers gripping the steering wheel tight. His knuckles turned white. His jaw moved behind his lips, grinding his teeth. Although normally the roads where they were, with their giant hills and twisting, blind curves, made him very nervous, he drove down them at the brink of driving right off the road. When Vaughn burst out of the front of the library, the world was on pause just like before. He barely noticed. His head felt light, but he kept running this time. He was halfway to his car before the world suddenly jumped back into life. People on the sidewalk near his car looked stunned when they saw him there, and he had a fraction of a thought maybe it looked like he had just appeared on the street out of nowhere. Time for worrying about those phenomena at another time. He had things to do. As he drove, Vaughn became acutely aware of the shape and weight of the gun in his pocket. He had never fired a gun before. When he was a kid, he had numerous air guns and was a pretty good shot, but never a real gun. Never at another person. His magnanimous feelings toward Ron had vanished now. Yeah, he was young and stupid, but he was an adult. More than ever before, Vaughn wanted to drive all the way back home, kill Ron, sever his head, then drive back here with his bloody, dripping trophy held in his hand. He imagined finding Judy asleep in the bed and tossing the head onto her in the middle of the night. When she opened her jaw to scream, he'd shoot her right through the mouth. Vaughn didn't trust Abe at all, of course. He had a sinking feeling once the deed was done, the hidden library would just vanish. He'd probably be standing there with a gun in his hand and blood on his clothes, shouting like a lunatic when the police came. This was fine. He wanted them to come. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. It was okay with him now. What mattered was ending this thing. Finishing this sham he and Judy had been living and wipe the fucking smile off her fucking face. The anger bubbled beneath him in a seemingly endless river of pure rage. He hadn't realized how much resentment was there beneath the surface. Yes, he knew he and Judy had been a bit distant as of late, but he hadn't thought she would do this. They had been through so much. A year after they got married, Judy had gotten pregnant. They were so happy and prepared their house for the baby's arrival. Then, at about 3 months, she had a miscarriage. This had hit them harder than either of them thought possible. At the time, Judy leaned into him while they sat in the driveway outside the house, having just come from another doctor's appointment, and she said she wasn't sure they would get through it this time. She felt this might be too high a wall to climb with him. The blows kept coming, too. Judy soon found out she would not be able to get pregnant again. They made half-hearted discussions about adopting, but by that point, they were exhausted. So tearfully, one weekend, they dismantled and sold off the things in the baby's room. Then they repainted and it became an office. They had never discussed it again. Then, 2 months after they removed the crib and sold it online, Vaughn lost his job. Judy was back at work and they had enough to survive, but it was 6 whole months of stress and worry as his severance ran out along with the unemployment. He finally found a newer and better job, but there had been a lot of lost sleep, tension, and frustration. Since then, though, they had clawed their way back. He and Judy had made love again a year later. They were suddenly like they were when they first met and couldn't keep their hands off of each other. Judy got promoted, then Vaughn did too. Things were going well, although they were each busier than they had been before. Now this ridiculous thing with a stupid man who didn't deserve to look at her, let alone touch her. God damn it! Vaughn slammed his hands against the steering wheel. The car swerved to the left, and he fought with the car to pull it back. The road became blurry, and when he wiped at his eyes, he realized he was crying. Was this how his father felt? The thought shot through his brain like a bullet. Had there been things between his parents he'd never noticed? Had his own mother betrayed the man Vaughn barely had the chance to know? Vaughn was suddenly flooded with memories. Was Abe doing this to him? Was this something to do with the library? Memories of his father looming over him, having come home from working another night shift, looking tired and worn out, kicking his shoes off near the door, and the horrendous stench of the foot odor combined with the cigarettes he smoked back then. This was the 70s when smoking was dangerous, but no one seemed to really care or believe. There were the early days, before his sister came into the world when Vaughn was 5. Vaughn would sit on the living room floor and play with his toys while his dad sat in the big chair against the wall, smoking and watching television. Sometimes Vaughn would sit in his dad's lap and his dad would make him laugh by rubbing his stubbled face against Vaughn's while shouting, "Whisker burns!" Vaughn had to pull over. There wasn't much along this stretch of road, but there was a farm up ahead which was large enough to host a farmer's market on the weekends. This was held in a large driveway area, now open and empty. There were no people there at the moment, which was perfect. Vaughn swung into the lot and sat there with the car's engine running. The dust from his spinning tires across the gravel swirled around him and put him in his own little temporary cloud. The tears were back, and Vaughn looked at his hands to see they were shaking. The memories were intense and unrelenting. Why was this happening? His father worked hard. Mostly, he worked nights. When Vaughn's sister was born, they would play together, but it was a rule they had to be quiet during the day so they didn't wake Dad up. He would appear in the morning to watch TV, but he never wanted to play or do much of anything with either of them. He was tired, so he wanted to eat something, drink coffee, smoke, and then go to bed. Somehow, he still managed to sleep. During the day, Vaughn, his sister, and friends would play around the house, but always out front. The backyard was where Dad's bedroom was, and no one was to disturb him during the day. Then Mom would make dinner, wake Dad up, and he'd join them for a meal. After eating, Dad would watch a little more TV with the family before heading back to bed for a few more hours, being awakened just as the kids went to bed. This is just how things were. Vaughn didn't know anything else. He loved his father, but his dad was always an enigma. When his dad had a day off, they went out to breakfast as a family, and Vaughn remembered laughing a lot. Dad always ate his omelet and drank lots of coffee. If it wasn't an omelet, Dad was an Eggs Benedict kind of a guy. There were times when Vaughn and his dad played with his toys on the floor. Christmas was a big day for such things. His father seemed to enjoy playing with the toys as much as Vaughn. But in retrospect, there was a sadness there too. Something behind his dad's eyes. Something lost and looking for a port in a mental storm. Vaughn was 10 years old when things went really bad. His mom got pregnant. She was in her early 40s and they seemed happy about it, but everyone, even Vaughn, understood there were health risks. Vaughn tried to be supportive, but the eventual did happen. His mother lost the baby, and his father fell into a funk. A real one. Nothing subtle about it. His dad slept all day and then was hard to wake up at night. They went to their usual breakfast on the weekend, but his father didn't seem quite as jovial as he had been. The jokes were less frequent. They didn't go to the movies so much. More often, his father snapped at his mother or he and his sister. Nothing seemed good enough, and he would fly off the handle on the least little thing. One night, his father and mother got into a spectacular fight. The shouting had been intense, elevated to screaming. Vaughn and his sister cowered in their room. Vaughn read books to his sister, trying to keep her calm, but it was hard. They were terrified. When they heard their father's footsteps coming down the hall, they quickly hid under their blankets in their respective beds. Sure enough, he opened their door and his heavy breathing filled the room. "Go to sleep," he barked, then slammed the door. The next day, their dad's car was still in the driveway. His mom fed them breakfast and saw them off to school, saying little. Vaughn's sister asked about their father, but Mom just shut her up. His mother gripped the steering wheel tight as she drove, seemed distracted and uncertain for the entire trip. Kids have an amazing way of jumping from one thing to another. Vaughn went off to school and got caught up in daily school things. Never once did he think about his father or his mother. Not until the end of the school day came, and he saw his mother behind the wheel of the car, her face pale, her eyes wide and staring, with red around them as if she had been crying, did the dread start to sink its claws into his stomach. His sister seemed oblivious, but there was something about his mother which sent up red flags left and right. While his sister did all she could to get Vaughn riled up, he ignored her and stared out the window. When they reached home, it was Vaughn out of the car first. He had no idea what he intended to do, but some part of him thought he could head off the resumption of the battle from the night before by getting into the house first. Maybe if he ran to his father and told him how much he loved him, or at least warned him Mom was in a mood, then things would be okay. His father was not in the living room, nor was he in his favorite chair in the rear family room. The chair looked as if it had been moved, the footrest extended. Vaughn ran through the house, calling out to his father. Vaughn was puzzled. His father was always in his chair at this time. He'd lay back, smoking cigarette after cigarette, and watch TV. Thinking maybe his dad had gone to bed, Vaughn ran to his bedroom next. If his father was asleep and he woke him up, he'd get yelled at, but he was still determined to find a way to step in between his parents. The words would come to him, he thought. He'd find a way to negotiate some sort of peace. The bedroom door was open. The bed was made. His father's work clothes lay on the floor, but his father was not there. Vaughn's smile froze on his face, and his brow creased. He heard his mother yelling at his sister in the background, but this only served to stoke the desire within him to move faster. Vaughn called out to his father one more time, and this time ran back to the family room. Something told him there was a clue there, something his eyes had seen but his brain had yet to acknowledge. As soon as he walked through the kitchen, he realized what it was. The basement door was open. Strange. This door was never left open. The stairs were steep, and the chance of either Vaughn or his sister tumbling down them was great. At the bottom of the rickety wooden steps was hard concrete. The basement was unfinished, but there was a pool table and toys and boxes along the wall. Why was this open? As Vaughn moved slowly toward the door, he heard his mother let out a noise he had never heard before. A yell. Distantly, he realized he heard her shout his name, but instead of stopping, this caused Vaughn to run down the stairs. He reached the bottom and spun in a circle. When he turned to his left, a scream started deep within his body, but froze somewhere in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was looking at because believing it was real was to acknowledge what it was. This was his imagination, like when he was certain there were monsters beneath his bed or hiding in the closet. At first, Vaughn wasn't even sure what his eyes were showing him. How could the brain of a child his age process what he was looking at? He saw shoes, with the toes pointed down, barely touching the cement floor of the basement. It was his father's shoes he recognized first. Beneath the shoes was a puddle of foul-smelling liquid. His dad had put his weekend jeans on for some reason, which were stained now. His hands hung limply at his sides, the skin pale. It was the face which made Vaughn finally release the scream in his throat, the face which would haunt him for the rest of his life and make him wake up screaming time and again well into adulthood. His father's face bulged around the cord he had tied around his neck. His tongue protruded from his lips, turned black now. The face was also black and blue, as if he had been beaten and bruised before hung. His dad's eyes were open, the lids not quite closed, and he stared at Vaughn. The eyes were not accusatory or angry. They were sad, as if telling Vaughn life was not worth it. If you worked and worked, got married, had a family, none of it mattered. In the end, you ended up dead in a basement having pissed yourself. Vaughn had no idea how long he stood there screaming. The next thing he remembered, his mother was there behind him, covering his face, too late, with her hands, and pulling him away. However, her own screams served to scare him even more than his own as she looked at what was displayed before them. For years, Vaughn wondered, what had his father been thinking? What had the final fight been about? His mother would never tell him. Perhaps if he went back to the hidden library, he could look it up and see. Maybe he could find his father's book and see what was on his mind as he made the noose and stood on the box. What were the thoughts in his head when he kicked the box away, then hung there, barely touching the floor with his toes, strangling to death? Had his father felt as alone as Vaughn felt now? Had he felt betrayed? Perhaps he wondered what he had done to deserve the verbal assaults his mother threw at him, just like Vaughn wondered what he had done to drive his wife into the arms of another man. As he sat on the side of the road, he could picture his father's face so clearly. It was still a memory he could conjure with total accuracy and vividness. The sadness, the purple hue to the skin. Would Judy have a different look once he shot her? Vaughn pulled the pistol out and stared at it. Was he really going to do this? He had never killed anyone or anything. At the same time, he had to confront his wife about what she was doing. He had to stop it. The anger was still there, but now there was sadness. As Vaughn weighed his options, a thought occurred to him. Maybe there was something else. Maybe if he could just show Judy the truth of the world, she'd wake up the way he had. Vaughn put the gun away and shifted the car into drive. A moment later, he was speeding down the road. The anger still burned, but now a bright ember of hope merged with a dim ember of possibility to create something else inside his chest. Vaughn arrived back at the house 15 minutes later. When he walked in the door, he expected everyone to be out on the back porch or watching television. Instead, his wife and her folks were still sitting around the dinner table. It looked as if they had just served the meal, the food still steaming hot. The three of them looked up at him with mild surprise and concern. "I didn't think you'd make it back," Judy said. Vaughn smiled weakly. "Sorry, took longer than planned." "We just served up the food," his mother-in-law replied. Vaughn was once again struck by how differently time moved in the hidden library. Did the world freeze, or did it just slow to a crawl so glacial it appeared nothing moved? These were questions to ask Abe later, but they nagged and itched at Vaughn's brain. The meal was delicious. Steak, vegetables, potatoes. The conversation was light, and Vaughn managed to stay engaged throughout. At the same time, he kept his eyes on Judy. Did she seem distracted? Agitated? The rule of the house was no phones at the table. Did the bumping up and down of her leg under the table mean she was thinking about Ron? Did her eyes dart left and right a little too often? Perhaps like a trapped animal looking for a way out? Dinner finished, and somehow Vaughn did not start screaming at his wife. He was particularly proud of this. Now was the tough part. Judy had plans to stay in tonight, but he needed her to come with him. He had to try to show her what he saw and what he knew. They stood up to clear off the table. While rinsing dishes in the sink, Vaughn watched his wife out of the corner of his eye. At one point, she grabbed her phone and headed out of the room. She said she had to use the restroom, but the minutes extended until she was gone for more than 5 minutes. Neither of his in-laws seemed to notice, so Vaughn did his best to keep his cool and finish the dishes. His mother-in-law said something about dessert, but Vaughn begged off and walked through the house. He found Judy sitting on the front porch, texting away. Vaughn opened the door as quietly as he could and stepped up behind her. He couldn't see what she was texting, but at the top of the screen, the name of who she was texting with was visible. Ron. "I think we need to talk," Vaughn said. Judy jumped and the phone fell from her hand. She stood up and whipped around, facing Vaughn with wide eyes. Her face immediately switched from startled to angry, then worried. "You scared me," she said, her chest heaving. "Why do you sneak up on me like that?" "You said you were going to the bathroom," Vaughn said, his voice sad and quiet. "Judy, don't even try to pretend here. I know what's going on. You want to tell me about Ron?" Judy flustered and couldn't spit out a word. "Vaughn, look, Vaughn didn't even realize he had pulled the pistol out of his pocket at first, until he saw the look in Judy's eyes. He held it in his right hand. It felt almost natural there now, as if he had been preparing himself in some part of his own mind for this very moment. "Where did you get that?" Judy asked. "Vaughn, what are you doing? You hate guns." "We're going for a drive," Vaughn said evenly. "I need to show you something." Judy shook her head. "You're out of your mind if you think I'm going anywhere with you while you're holding a gun." "Then I'll shoot you here in front of the house," Vaughn said. "Then I'll have to shoot your parents and myself. If you scream, I'll have to shoot you, then any nosy neighbor who comes over to see what's up. What if it's one of the kids on this block?" Judy looked stunned. She blinked several times, as if doing so might clear the vision in front of her. Vaughn did not understand where the words came from. He couldn't even believe he was saying them and couldn't imagine ever being able to shoot a kid, or anyone else, for that matter. What he said didn't even make much sense in the long run. If his plan ended with him shooting himself, why not just start there and avoid killing anyone else? Despite the roiling confusion inside his mind, Vaughn kept his face even and emotionless. But he heard Abe's voice in the back of his head, telling him he needed to assert himself, do this thing, find out what she knew, find out to his satisfaction and take whatever steps were necessary. Then come to the library. Come find out what the rest of the universe had to offer. All the secrets of every person were there. Imagine what he could find out. "Vaughn, put the gun away," Judy said, her voice trembling but overall calm. "I can explain. We can talk about this. It's not what you think." "Oh, it is what I think. It's exactly what I think. You've been fucking some young guy named Ron. I know. I know a lot of things. Things I need to show you. Yeah, we need to talk, but we're not doing it here. Now get in the fucking car." To add emphasis to the threat, he cocked the hammer back. How much of a hair trigger was there? He had no idea. Carefully, he put his finger outside the trigger guard, hoping she didn't notice. "Where do you want to go?" she asked. Now, her voice showed the first signs of panic. She cast a quick glance back at the car, as if doing so would provide some kind of answer. "Where do you want to take me?" "I'm not gonna shoot you or anyone if you get in the fucking car, Judy. I need to show you something. I need you to see what I've seen." "You're talking crazy, Vaughn. What have you seen? Did you look at my phone?" Vaughn smiled and shook his head. "I've seen your thoughts. Now get in the goddamn car and let's go. I'm not asking again. Come with me and let me show you something. Then we can talk." "Where?" "A library," Vaughn said. Then he pointed at the car with the barrel of the gun. "Now go. In the car. Now." The drive was tense and seemed to take forever. Judy kept trying to talk to Vaughn, but he grit his teeth and ground his jaw, stopping himself from replying. He held the gun in his left hand, pointed at her across his lap. "Look, Vaughn, we can work this out," she said, her voice somehow calm now. "We can go to couples therapy or something. I met Ron one night while I was out and it just sort of happened. You know, things with us haven't been great for a while." "That's a reason to fall into the arms of a younger man," Vaughn said through clenched teeth. "I didn't run off and bang an intern at work. I just stayed with you." And you think doing something like this is healthy? Judy asked. Where did you even get a fucking gun? You hate guns. This is insane. Vaughn nodded. This we can agree on. I think this is insane. He laughed a weird, desperate laugh. I mean, this is utterly crazy, but I need you to see. I need you to see what I saw today. I need you to understand. You're not making any sense, Judy said. She put a hand on his shoulder as if to comfort him. Just pull over. We can go back to my parents' house. I'll let this go, and when we get back home, we can find help for you and for both of us. We need therapy for us as a couple and each individually. Stop it, Vaughn said. Stop trying to talk me out of this. It's not happening. You have to come with me. I have to show you something. Where are we going? You'll see. They drove in near silence the rest of the way. Vaughn kept his eyes on the road, but thought he heard Judy crying beside him at one point. He wondered if she was weeping for herself, for them as a couple, or for losing her boy toy. He didn't care. Let her weep. Let her weep for whatever she wanted, but she would see. She would see the library. She would see Abe. Then she could finally understand the universe, and they would be back on an even footing once again. He hooked a left in front of a passing truck into the parking area across from the library. The lights were on, but it had to be close to closing time. He shifted into park and pointed the gun in Judy's face. We're going into the library, he said. Don't scream. Don't cause a scene. Just get out and walk with me across the street. I have the gun, regardless, and before anyone can help you, I'll shoot you, then myself. Don't test me. Vaughn, Judy said as tears streamed down her cheeks. There's nothing in the library. Just books. Just that old woman and her dog. I don't know what's caused you to break from reality like this, but we have to stop. We have to get you help. Right now, you're not thinking rationally. Stop talking, Vaughn said. Stop fucking talking. You will not rationalize your way out of this. Get out of the car and head toward the library. Don't run. Don't scream. Judy reached for the door handle, tears dripping into her lap. She muttered something under her breath, but Vaughn couldn't hear what it was. When her door opened, Vaughn opened his own and got out of the car as quickly as he could. He was around to her side of the vehicle a few seconds later, grabbing her left arm in his hand. He stowed the gun in his left front pocket, keeping one hand on it as they moved. He could feel its hardness, somehow reassuring, but also terrifying. The area was not too busy at this hour, at least on the street. The sun had just started to head down below the tree line, and the sky was turning all shades of orange, pink, and blue. When Vaughn cast a glance behind, he saw there were plenty of diners in the windows of the restaurant where they had consumed lunch earlier. Did any of them see what was happening? It felt as if they were broadcasting what was going on in bright neon letters. They were across the street in seconds, and then up the stairs a moment later. Vaughn's hands were sweating, and his heart pounded. He realized he was whispering under his breath, begging the universe for the hidden library to be there, to not be crazy. Vaughn opened the door. Judy walked just in front of him. He saw her glance through the interior doors, perhaps hoping to see Dolores. She started to head toward the entrance to the interior of the library. He thought she was getting ready to run, bolt through the entry and run screaming through the shelves, looking for a rear entrance or the librarian. Vaughn shook his head, heading for the side door to his left. Not that way, this way. You said we were going to the library, Judy whispered. Not the library through there. The hidden library. Vaughn, what are you talking about? Don't you see how crazy this sounds? Vaughn pulled the gun out of his pocket and snapped at her. Of course I do. God damn it, can't you see how fucked up I am? I need to prove I'm not crazy. Before you or I do anything about you and Ron, I need you to see this. Vaughn reached out a hand and placed it on the door handle. He heaved, hoping for the door to swing open dramatically. He wanted to see her face when time stopped. Just to see her face when she felt the air change around her would confirm everything. The door didn't budge. Wait, he whispered. Just wait. He pulled again. The door made a soft grunt noise, but didn't open. No, Vaughn whispered. No. It has to be there. It can't have moved. With mounting frustration, Vaughn pounded at the door. He kicked it. He was about to fire a few rounds into the goddamn thing when the inner door to the library opened. Hey, what's going on out here? Dolores stood in the doorway. At her side was the dog. Dolores, hey, it's Vaughn. Remember me? I was here earlier. Of course I remember you, she said. I don't forget a face. You were wandering around looking at the books. My remembering you doesn't, however, explain why you're kicking my door. Vaughn held out his hands and then realized he had the gun still in his hand. Look, I need to get into the store. Please. Do you have a key? Dolores nodded slowly. I do, but why are you holding a gun? What's happening? Why do you want to go upstairs? There's nothing up there. Yes, there is. Please. I need to get up there. I need to take Judy up there to see it. Dolores seemed to notice Judy for the first time. She cast a glance at her, eyebrow raised. Vaughn followed her gaze, waiting with bated breath to see if she'd do anything. Vaughn waited for Judy to scream for help or some form of hysteria. Would he start shooting? Did he have the ability and capacity to do so? Okay, I can open the door for you, Dolores said, fishing into her pocket and removing a large keyring. Just put the gun away, okay? We don't have to take this any further than this, right? When you were here earlier, you seemed like a nice guy. I'd hate to have to call the cops or an ambulance here. The older woman waddled her way over to the door. She fished around her keyring until she found a gold-colored key, which fit into the lock without protest. The lock turned with a loud click, and she pulled on the door. With a grunt and the sound of metal on metal, the door opened. Beyond was a darkened stairway leading up, and not much else. Even at the distance Vaughn stood away from the door, he could smell dust and mustiness from the open door. There you go, Dolores said, stepping aside. There's an area up there we used to use for events, a stage and tables, even a music system like they used to have in old-time days, with a player piano and drums on the wall which bang out a set rhythm as it plays songs. Used to be dances there, too. Vaughn turned to Judy, just barely hearing what Dolores was saying. Okay, upstairs. Let me show you. Judy nodded and walked past him into the doorway. When she passed Dolores, Vaughn saw her raise her eyebrows and give a shrug. Dolores acknowledged nothing. If a message had been conveyed, no one ran for a phone or screamed for help. We won't be long, Vaughn said. Thank you. Okay, let me know when you're done, she replied, and then put a hand on his shoulder as he walked past. Son, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what happened after you left here, but I could tell even then something was going on between you two. Don't act rashly, please. Not in my library. I need to see Abe, Vaughn said, his voice quivering. I need to show him to Judy. Dolores looked confused, but her hand fell away from his shoulder. Vaughn entered the dark doorway. Judy was halfway up the stairs, looking back and down. Vaughn waved his hand, and she turned, heading up the rest of the way up the steps. He held the gun loosely in his right hand as he walked up the steps. There was no feeling of the world shifting beneath his feet. The buzzing in his head did not appear. When he breathed, it was not the weird, hot air which had been there when he talked to Abe. Instead, he just breathed in dust and old, stale air. He felt a fist clench his heart. They reached the top of the stairs, and Judy stood in the room which greeted them. She looked around with bewilderment, but not awe. Vaughn at first could not see what was there. For an instant, he still saw the hidden library, but then it all resolved into stark relief. There were dozens of round tables, covered in white cloths. Chairs perched on top of the tables, their legs pointed at the ceiling like dead insects on a windowsill. The room was large and mostly empty. Most of the chairs and furniture were pushed up against one wall, leaving the large open area in the distance for dancing. At the end of the dance floor was a stage with an old blue curtain where entertainers would come out to perform. Above them were gears and tubes. Vaughn followed their trail until he saw a set of drums nailed into the wall. There were woodwind instruments in other parts of the wall, and in the corner was the piano. Vaughn bet there was a host of old-time songs which could be played, and the instruments on the walls and ceiling would play. A band without players. No, Vaughn said, stepping into the room and spinning around. No, this isn't right. This isn't what was here. What was here, Vaughn? Judy asked. What did you see here? There was a room here, Vaughn said. A big room and a counter. Then over here there was another doorway and a line of shelves which went on in a goddamn eternity. There was an old man here, Abe, except when I came back later he wasn't old, he was young. He showed me the books, billions of books, books which had people's thoughts in them. Every thought they ever had, and you could turn to the last page and see their thoughts as they had them. I saw my mom's. I saw the fucking president's thoughts. Then I saw your thoughts. I saw how you wanted Ron. I saw it. Tears sprang out from his eyes and coursed down his cheeks. The frustration inside of him burned like a furnace, and he felt it turning into anger. Vaughn, you need to calm down, Judy said, walking slowly towards him as if he were a wild dog growling and snarling at her. Think about what you're saying. Think about how crazy it sounds. Look around you. This is what's up here and what's been up here for decades. You can smell it. This room is old, musty, and dirty. It's been here a long time, unused. Vaughn spun in a tight circle. This had to be a trick. Abe was here. He could feel his presence, eyes watching him. I'm here, Abe, he called out. I brought Judy. I need you to show her. Show her the books. You have to help me. There was no reply other than a soft echo of his own words a fraction of a second after he said them. Vaughn put his hands to his head. His brain felt as if it were on fire, but not in the way it usually felt when he had visited this room before. This was like the buzzing of bees inside his skull. This is what it feels like to go insane, he thought. Vaughn, sweetie, please, Judy said. She had taken several more steps towards him as he spun around and called out to seemingly no one. Put the gun down. I don't know what's happened, but you need help. You're sick. I can help you get help, please. Vaughn whirled around and faced her, his expression a mask of anger. Get away from me. You want to help me? Why would you want to help me? You hate me. Don't know why. I know you do because I saw it in the book. I saw your thoughts, Judy. You blame me for every failure you've had since we've been married. You and your fucking asshole boyfriend, Ron. You never wanted to help me before. You never cared when I was in pain, did you? Judy backed away, but Vaughn saw her jaw moving, grinding her teeth. The anger within her was building too. Did you? She snapped back. Did you ever notice how lonely I was? Did you ever care? Did you see how miserable I was at the first job I had when we got married? The long hours and lack of respect? No, you just skated along, happy to live off the salary I brought in. Don't you play the fucking victim with me, Vaughn. I always appreciated you, Vaughn cried. His head buzzed louder. It was like a nest of angry bees had been placed inside his skull. Couldn't she see the pain he was in? His skull would soon split open. The pain grew each second. I always told you how much I appreciated you. I did the best I could, but we got past all of that. We're in a good place now. We're both finally happy and doing well in our careers. Why would you pick now to find another guy? I don't know, Vaughn, Judy said, her voice filled with exhaustion. Maybe I got tired of the fights. I got tired of the battle, and when the battle seemed over, there was nothing left. Stop it, Vaughn said, shaking his head. Stop talking to me. Stop trying to talk your way out of this. He looked around once more. Abe! God damn it, Abe, where are you? There's no one here, Vaughn, Judy said. The anger inside of her pushed way down, and the sympathetic voice returned. We can figure a way out of this. We can get you help, and then we can try to work on us. Vaughn felt the tears streaming down his face. They burned tracks across his cheeks and dripped to the floor where, for all he knew, they burned their way right through the wood. He felt as if his blood had been turned into acid. His heart hammered in the bony confines of his ribcage. Vaughn turned back to Judy, her form blurry as a new wave of tears flowed out of his eyes and down his face. I love you, he said. I always have. I never strayed. I never got close. I'd show you my own books so you can see, but I don't know where Abe is. There's no Abe, honey, Judy said, once again stepping towards him carefully. No books up here and no hidden library. It was all in your head. Then how did I know about Ron? You probably saw something on my phone, Judy said, her eyes now also filled with tears. I'm sorry about all of this. I love you too, Vaughn. I did from the moment I saw you. I don't know how we got so far apart, but there's nothing between us we can't tear down. No gap we can't try to fill in. Put the gun down. Let's get out of here, please. Vaughn almost did it. He stared down at the gun and felt sick as his guts twisted. He hated guns. He always had. They were nothing but engines of destruction. People tried to tell him all the time when he argued for increased control they were just tools. Great, he would say. Build me a house with a gun and then I will agree with you. How had he ended up with a gun? Was Judy right? All of this was in his mind? Then, clearly, in the back of his head, he heard Abe's voice, telling him he needed to tie up the loose ends in his life. He needed to take care of things around him so he could come back. Maybe this was why Abe wasn't here. Judy was a loose end. Without her, he could see those books again, read more of the books again, know more secrets. Despite the sound of Abe's voice in his head, Vaughn turned around to see his wife nearly on top of him. She froze for a moment, studying his face. Then she put a hand against his left cheek. Vaughn, whatever's gone wrong with us and with you can be fixed, she said in a voice which sounded so reasonable. It was hard to argue against it, but Vaughn could hear Abe's voice telling him she was wrong. Come on, put the gun down and come with me. We'll just head back and pack up, then head home. It was here, Vaughn pleaded. It's real. There's Abe and the books. They record our thoughts, all of them. Who does? She countered. I don't know. I just know it's here. I saw it. I held the books. I held your book. I'm sorry for whatever you saw or think you saw. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but you're not thinking clearly. She came in closer and wrapped her arms around him. He felt her body against his, and his brain was immediately flooded with images from when they were first together. The first time he held her naked in bed. The first time they moved in together and had to share a bathroom. The times they sat side by side on the couch talking or watching TV, his hands entwined with her own, kissing her when he went out the door in the morning. Then the name Ron flashed across his mind. The words on the page of the elusive book, so many words about how much she wanted him, needed him, how she loved his cock and wanted to feel it inside of her. The anger flashed hot and bright white. Vaughn made a loud moaning sound of pure agony. He didn't even realize the gun had gone off at first. There was no dramatic sound. A soft pop muffled between their bodies. He barely felt the pistol move in his hand. Judy didn't seem to realize what had happened at first either. She just stepped back, her eyes wide, staring at him. Those eyes, which he had stared into so many times, looked so confused and scared. She pressed both hands to a spot on her side, below her ribcage, and when her hands came away, they were covered in blood. Vaughn? She asked, as if confused. Then she collapsed. how broken she looked when she started to fall. Vaughn instinctively reached for her and caught her as she fell. The pistol dropped from his hand and clattered to the floor as they slowly sank to the dusty wood. Judy's eyes never left his own, and the surprise and confusion just seemed to grow as they settled to the floor. "Vaughn?" she asked again. "I'm here," he said. I didn't mean to. Her body twitched and her chest heaved, and then her stare fixed on his own. The pupils became fixed and dilated. He felt her shudder all over, and then she was gone. "Brilliant," a voice said from the doorway. Vaughn looked up and was surprised to see Dolores standing in the doorway. She had a too-wide smile on her face. He audibly gasped when she began to change, her features running across her skull like water. Then her skull also changed. It only took a moment, but Vaughn felt as if the moment ran on forever. Eventually, Abe stood there in his dark suit with the red tie. This time, he wore a pencil-thin mustache like some old Hollywood movie star. Abe waved his hand, and the room began to waver like his face had a moment ago. The hardwood floor vanished and was replaced with marble. Then the tables faded to gray, became transparent, and soon the room was empty. Murals appeared on the walls, and the openings into the dance floor disappeared to be replaced with paintings. The counter grew out of nothingness behind Vaughn, and just past this was the doorway into the vast area of bookshelves. The murals were of murder. Men stabbing women or each other. Men in brutal fights covered in blood. The image of a man in Vietnam shooting another man point blank in the head. The other pictures were probably famous too, but Vaughn didn't recognize them. "You passed the test, Vaughn," Abe said. There was a noise from within the hallway, and then Dolores's dog appeared in the doorway. A moment later, it changed too. Its bones cracked and snapped as it grew, the face lengthened, the eyes got larger, and the teeth much longer. Eventually, it was nearly as tall as Abe. This hellhound creature panted, and Abe patted it on the head. "Good boy," Abe said. "Go lay down now. Daddy has some work to do." The creature licked Abe's hand, let out a hideous yelp, and walked past Abe into the dark area of the hidden library. Vaughn could hear the claws tapping on the marble floor for an exceedingly long time. "Why?" Vaughn asked. "Why weren't you here so I could show her? I wanted her to see. If she saw, maybe things would have worked out." Abe sighed and shook his head in mock sadness. "This is not a job for couples. Trust me, we've tried in the past. It always ends up bad, never works out. It takes guts and real balls to do this job, Vaughn. The kind of balls necessary to commit murder, for example. I needed to test you. I needed to know." "Was it real?" Vaughn asked. "Was what I saw in her book real?" Abe seemed shocked he would even ask. "Oh, I lie a lot, V, but I do not lie about the books. The books are not lies. No, sorry, old man, but the words you saw in the book were 100% real. Legit. She really was fucking a young dude named Ron. This was another reason she had to go, V. You had to take care of it because this job comes with a very long life expectancy. If you and her were here with the infidelity festering between you two, you'd end up fighting with each other for 1,000 years. We can't have that kind of distraction." Vaughn wiped his eyes. The tears burned their way down his face and gnawed at the corners of his eyes. When he pulled his hands away from his face, he saw his palms were slick with blood. "What are you? God damn it, what are you?" Abe walked around the room, his hands in his pockets and a bemused smile on his face. So many names. You humans have given us so many names. Devils, goblins, demons, lower gods, tricksters, sprites, fairies, elves, shapeshifters, skinwalkers. We're the things which hide in the shadows. Most of us, anyway. We whisper the naughty things into your ears. We put the shadows on your souls and the darkness into your hearts. When we tell someone to kill, he takes out a school. We whisper into another and they kill themselves, strap on a bomb vest, or crucify a man of peace on a cross. Sometimes we work on large numbers, convincing people one group is responsible for all the evil and must be destroyed. We keep humans in check, all the while permitting them to think they have control. We play with you because we were here first and we got passed over. You humans with your thin skins, small minds, and easy-to-confuse hearts somehow got the drop on us. So we wage a guerrilla war. Strike and hide. Abe waved his arms around at the hidden library. The air shimmered and blurred as he did. We reach through the spots in the walls, separating realities which are thin to touch you, corrupt you, warp you, to make you give in to your darkest desires, to show you the fear lurking inside of you, and then tell you the monsters under the bed were real all along. Vaughn shook his head as if to clear it. He felt dizzy, lightheaded. Something wet ran over his upper lip and he wiped it with his sleeve, not noticing the red smear he left afterward. "I don't understand," he said. "What's the point? What do you get out of this? There's no job, right? No place for me with you? Is the library all lies?" Abe tilted his head back and laughed. "Oh, the books and what's in them is reality. Something of my own invention. As to why, well, you see, we're predators. You humans are the prey. We feed off your emotions. Fear is the sweetest and most satisfying. Confusion is savory and filling. Find a way to combine them, and you have a meal to keep you full for centuries." He licked his lips and smacked them as if satisfied. Abe extended his hands, and the room behind them responded with the soft whirring noise of the books spinning around and around on their shelves. 3 books floated out of the darkness and landed softly in his palms. Abe laughed and turned to look once again at Vaughn. "We seek out the people who we feel will respond the way we want, the way we need." He shrugged. "We're wrong sometimes, but more often than not, we aren't. I knew you'd give good fear and confusion, but to properly answer your question, I didn't lie. You see, we can't be everywhere at once. Not only do our kind require humans for food purposes, we can extend lives and use you for assistance in other ways. You've probably already noticed how time moves more slowly here. Sometimes I think it even stops. You stop aging here. It means you'll live a long time here. I'll feed, and you can help lure prey. It takes so much energy to cross over. Having someone on this side helps. Economics, you see." Abe walked slowly, the 3 books, 2 in his right hand, 1 in the other, balanced in front of him. "But there's one final test you need to pass. One more thing you need to know. If you pass this, you're the person I think I can recruit for the gig. I need you to manage this library. I will visit from time to time, but I have to travel. The last manager passed away after nearly 2 centuries of manning the desk." Abe stopped in front of Vaughn, staring down at him with red eyes which somehow conveyed sadness and sympathy, mixed with such hostility as Vaughn had never experienced before. He extended both hands toward Vaughn, handing him the books. Vaughn gently set his wife's head down on the floor, then closed her eyes. He stayed on the ground, but grabbed the 3 books, placing those on the marble in front of him. He crossed his legs like a kid on Christmas beneath the tree. He picked up the top book and stared at it with a confused look on his face. He passed his fingertips over the embossed lettering of the name on the cover. "I don't understand," he said. "This is my father's. He's been dead for years now." "Just open the book," Abe said. "Take a look." Vaughn opened the book. At first, there were just the jumbled thoughts of a baby, then a toddler. He flipped forward, finding his father's preteen and teen years. He decided the last thing he wanted to do was read about his dad's sex life, so he flipped ahead. Now there were the thoughts about work, how he hated his job, how miserable he was working in this place with little sunlight and the endless noise. His dad thought about breathing in the dust from the candy conveyor belts or the vats of liquid chocolate. On and on it went. At first, the thoughts were excited, joyful. He was going to be making candy, and at the same time, he would be earning enough money to support his family. Vaughn's eyes blurred yet again with more tears when he read his father's thoughts about him. His dad had been so excited to meet him, to have a son. There were so many of Vaughn's accomplishments as he grew up, but seen from his father's eyes. First step, first word, butt kiss. First time taking him to the movies. First time he rode a bike without training wheels. But a sadness began to creep into those thoughts from time to time. Going back much farther than Vaughn ever realized, his father showed signs of depression, losing interest in the world and feeling lost in a fog with no way out. Thoughts of suicide. The joy became less and less as Vaughn and his sister grew. Frustration led to anger. The feeling of love and pride was replaced by jealousy and sadness. A sense of loss over what might have been, had decisions just been made differently, grew from a small spark to an ember, to flames within his father's imagination. Near the back, Vaughn realized he had come to the night his father finally committed the act. The slow planning over days, testing places around the house to find something which could hold his weight, drafting and redrafting the suicide note, the endless darkness and profound sense of drowning while on dry land, just wishing someone would see the pain he was in and maybe reach out a hand, the immense loneliness. His father wanted the pain to end. There was doubt mixed in with the planning and the need to end it. What came after? Having been raised Catholic, he worried about hell. He worried about his soul, but there comes a point when even fire and brimstone can be overcome by pain and a desire to end it. Vaughn read his father's thoughts as he got his family out of the house, as he placed his note where his wife would find it. The steps read like a simple checklist. Head downstairs, find the box he had stowed down there days before to step on, tie the cord around the beam, tighten the noose. Then, the final step. Pain. Like a sharp slap of cold water in the face, all that had been before vanished. The fall jolted him but did not snap his neck. His feet kicked, trying to find the box, but succeeding only in kicking it further away. The immense pain of the cord compressing his windpipe, trying to breathe but unable to. The world going gray around the edges, black dots dancing in front of his eyes, his lungs screaming for breath and his body already shutting down. On and on it went, until the darkness covered him completely, swallowed him whole. His sight went first, but he heard the urine hit the ground as his bladder let go. The pain stopped. There was darkness. Vaughn leaned his head back and moaned loudly. The pain in his chest was like a blow from a fist. He couldn't remember a time when he had cried as much as he had today, but more tears flowed. "Oh, Dad," he whispered. Abe cleared his throat. "I know the suicide part was tough to deal with, but that wasn't the lesson. Yes, your dad was fucked up in ways you probably never realized, but look at the book. Look at it, Vaughn." Vaughn wiped his eyes, feeling blood smear across his face but not caring. He looked back down at the book. At first, he was unsure what Abe was trying to tell him. Then something leaped out at him. There were more pages. Lots of pages. What? He flipped to the next one and gasped. His father's thoughts continued after the darkness. His dad awoke in the black. Then there was light. Then he moved from one place to another, floating, moving, confused and terrified. This was not the heaven his Catholic upbringing had promised him, nor the purgatory which had been threatened. There was darkness and things moving in the dark. The confusion became terror. The terror went on and on for page after page, his father pleading for light, calling out to a God who did not seem interested in responding. desperately trying to find a way out of the shadows, back into the light, back to his home. Sad, keening pleas to the universe to let him do all of this over again. Then there was light. A new world. His father was able to move from one place to another by mere thought. He passed from one dimension to the next. Confusion gave way to wonder, then fear. Yes, there were amazing things out in these alternate worlds, but also things which hunted and bit. At one point, his father was being chased by beings who appeared to be little more than smoke. Then his dad became aware of voices in his head. With concentration, his father figured out he could check in on his family. He could observe his wife, Vaughn, and his daughter. He was frustrated he was not able to interact. He sent a bird instead, influencing a cardinal to tap at his wife's window, sending a monarch butterfly to land on his daughter's hand, whispering his son's name while also sending a flock of white butterflies to surround him one morning as he went to his car. "I'm here," he thought. "Can't you feel me? I'm here and everywhere. There's so much more to the universe, so much more to life than the shell you wear. It's glorious and terrifying. Please hear me. Feel me." On and on it went, page after page of terror and amazement, joy and sheer horror, unlike anything his corporeal body had experienced. Time and again being near and next to his family, the ability to be everywhere and nowhere, eventually moving past thinking in English or any language. The words became jumbled and then written in some primitive scrawl apparently even the book could not translate. "No," Vaughn whispered. "This is impossible. This is a trick. This is some kind of fucking trick." No, my boy," Abe said. "It's not. You see, thoughts continue. What is your mind, Vaughn? What is most of your body? It's energy, and it cannot be created nor destroyed, just changed from one to another. You move from physical energy contained within a bag of skin to this. But it's different for everyone. Look at the other books." His heart hammering, his mind buzzing with the angry sound of bees, Vaughn looked at the next book. This was his grandfather's. The man had been dead for more than 30 years. Vaughn barely remembered him at all. Vague memories of the way he smelled like cigars and always wanted to hand out candy. This book was much thicker, and he flipped through it faster, skipping to the end. Except there was no end. No end at all. His grandfather had a long, slow death from cancer, and the pain at the end was immense. Then relief. A desire for the last few months of his life for all of it to end. Vaughn watched on the last page as more words appeared, once again in symbols and thoughts he could not process. His brain was unable to decipher, but he saw his name appear. Vaughn. "He's thinking about me," Vaughn whispered. "The dead think about the living quite a bit," Abe said. "But they eventually move past thinking like we do in the physical world. Well, most do. Some do not. Some, depending on how they died, refuse to let go. They continue to exist in the first stage of pure agony, terror, and confusion. They find ways to lash out at us, angry at the living for just living." "What's this last book?" Vaughn asked with trepidation. Some part of him already knew. "I think you know." Vaughn's hand shook as he moved aside his grandfather's book to stare at the last one. He had to only see the first name to know what Abe had done. Judy. He had already seen the first parts and the part involving Ron. He flipped to the last pages. Vaughn read the sheer terror and panic in his wife's mind when he pulled the gun. The certainty he was going to shoot her down there in the driveway. The anger she felt when she realized he knew what she was up to. The desperate thoughts of how she could get out of this situation and maybe save things with Ron. Maybe she could have both worlds. Maybe she could have Vaughn committed and run to Ron. Judy wondered if she might be able to overpower Vaughn. Get the gun. Would she be able to shoot him? She had to protect her parents. She couldn't let him start shooting in the house. The fear of just how far Vaughn had gone over the edge. What did he think was in the library? How could he scare the poor old woman librarian? What was this room? My God, what was going on in her husband's mind? Vaughn felt a shock when he saw how much she still cared. When she said she would get him help and then they would get help together, she meant it. "Oh, no, 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 no," he moaned. "Oh, baby, I'm sorry, oh no." "Don't do it," Abe said. "Push it aside. Yes, she thought about it, but do you think she meant it, even there? Don't make the mistake that just because she thought it, it wasn't a lie. Humans lie to themselves all the time. Lie constantly, in their thoughts most of all." Vaughn turned the page, and there it was. The terror, the pain, the feeling of a bullet entering her body and tearing up her insides, the overpowering sense of betrayal, then sadness as she realized she had lost it all. The darkness. Then the thoughts continued, screaming into the darkness, confusion, screaming Vaughn's name. Anger leaped off the page, each word a dagger in his heart. She was out there, flailing, trying to get back. She was in the darkness now, right here, just a breath away, unable to reach him. "Oh, Judy," Vaughn whispered. He looked up at Abe. "You son of a bitch. You made me do this. Now she's gone and I sent her there. She's lost in the darkness. She can't find her way out." Abe did not appear bothered by this. He shrugged. "When the death is sudden or violent, it happens. Look at your father. Look at any of these." He waved his hands and more books flew to him. Their pages opened and they floated past Vaughn's eyes, each one of someone deceased. A girl who had died in a car accident, a middle-aged man who dropped dead of a heart attack, a woman whose brain flooded with blood as a vessel she didn't know had a weakness finally broke. All of them suddenly in darkness, lost, scared. "The human mind holds on for a time," Abe continued. "The difference usually comes from those who plan their deaths or die of a long illness. Some people are ready to go and adjust to their new situation quickly. All those bumps in the night, the ghostly visions, whispers in the dark, they're people who refuse to let go. So they stay around until they can affect the world they refuse to abandon. Some can never let go." Abe waved his hands and all the books flew away like frightened birds. They thunked on the shelves. "What about Judy? What will happen to her?" Abe held out both hands, palms up, a gesture of I don't know. "She's angry, Vaughn. Betrayed. Now she's scared. It's delicious. But how long she'll hold on to this world, to you, to her family, is unknown to me." Abe came closer to Vaughn, hiked up his trouser legs, and squatted down to look Vaughn in his eyes. Vaughn studied the creature's face. It was all false. The features were younger than ever, but unsteady. All of this was a mask. "I need you, Vaughn. With me, your lifespan will be centuries. Help me manage the library. When death finally does come, you'll be ready." Vaughn felt lost in his eyes, unable to think. He thought of Judy, lost in the darkness, filled with fear, and it was like a splash of cold water on his face. He shook his head. In a flash, he reached down and grabbed the gun, pointed it at Abe. Abe looked sad for a moment. He sighed and stood up straight. "You disappoint me, Vaughn," he sighed. "You just lie and lie. Everything around here is fake. This is all masks. You were just a mask. You wanted me to kill her. You knew I'd come here. What are you, the devil?" Abe laughed. "We've had this conversation before. I didn't do anything but show you the world, the universe. I showed you inside of the human mind. I've done it many times to many others. It brings the most powerful knowledge to your hands. It can be yours, always. But you have to cut ties. You have to be strong to realize what happens when humans die. Countless others have stood where you are. They have guns or knives. I give them out. They try to kill me. They talk about how evil I am. All I do is dispense knowledge. The greatest knowledge you can find. I can't help it if it cracks their mind. Vaughn fired the pistol. The gun seemed louder now, somehow bigger. Abe waved his hands and the bullets just vaporized midair. Vaughn fired again and again. This time, Abe let the bullets hit him, his jacket moving with the impact. However, when he looked down at the holes, they sealed themselves, and he looked back at Vaughn, shaking his head. "You can keep shooting, or you can make your decision," Abe said. "You can join me. Eventually, as the centuries pass, you might gain powers like mine. You can evolve, become something else. Vaughn, you need to listen to me. This petty drama you have here is nothing. Imagine reading the thoughts of genocides, massacres, shootings on a massive scale. Imagine reading the thoughts of assassins and witnessing history from within the minds of the people creating it. Think." Vaughn let out a cry of despair and looked down at the useless gun in his hand. Then he looked down at Judy's body. Her eyes were closed now, but he could feel her nearby. He could hear her. She was still in this room, but in darkness, lost. Vaughn looked up at Abe again. The creature, this thing, this living nightmare who had watched him and decided to fuck with his life, smiled at him. Vaughn wanted to die. More than anything, he wanted to die. "Fuck off," he said. Abe barely had time to react before Vaughn put the pistol into his mouth and fired upward. The gun made a muffled snapping sound, and his body jerked as the bullet passed through his brainstem. Darkness fell like a curtain.
"God damn it!"
Abe screamed. Vaughn's body fell to the floor. Abe roared. Outside the library, several people reported they heard thunder and felt a rumbling in the ground. A child holding her mother's hand looked at the library and saw flashes of light coming from an upstairs window. Abe transformed for a moment into the giant, scaly, red-eyed creature he really was and roared again. He threw himself against the walls and paid no heed to the fact powder from the bricks fell to the sidewalk outside. This went on for 5 more minutes before he transformed again. He stood facing the wall, straightened his tie, and looked down at his suit.
"Every time,"
he said. He turned and looked at the bodies on the floor of his library. He'd have to move them. It would be a murder-suicide once the news got a hold of it. The local press would have a field day. Mourning and sadness. Abe would read it as they thought about it and drink in the fear. He was almost full now. He hadn't gotten the assistant he needed, but he had absorbed so much energy, so much pain.
"Humans,"
he sighed. So sad, so predictable, so pathetic. Abe straightened his tie once more and walked back into his library. Vaughn felt the darkness and then saw the light. Brilliant light all around him. There were voices all over. Most of them were gibbering in fear and anger around him. They sounded insane. "Judy?" he cried out. "Vaughn? Where are you? It's dark here." He was thought now. He had no body. He felt no pain. He forced the energy he was to meet with Judy's energy, and he felt her presence next to him. A moment later, he reached into darkness and felt a hand clutch around his own, even though neither he nor Judy possessed hands any longer. "Pull me out!" "I will. I always will." "Where are we?" "We're starting the rest of our life." "You shot me. Did you shoot me?" "It doesn't matter now, Vaughn said. Hold on to me. Listen to me. We'll get out of this darkness together.
I'm scared.
I know, me too, but there's so much more to see. Just trust me. He felt her energy cling harder to his. They merged together like beings made of light, like gods. Then they pushed through the darkness together. Knowledge can be a very dangerous thing. Some secrets are best kept secret. This is especially true when the sun goes down, the darkness creeps in, and imagination takes over. The time when the night comes out. You've been listening to When the Night Comes Out, a weekly horror anthology podcast with stories by Brian W. Alaspa and narrated by Allie James. For Brian's work, visit his website at www.brianwalaspa.com or visit amazon.com for his books of fiction and nonfiction. Be sure to listen to Allie's work on Facebook at Allie James Projects.